hadn't planned to stop by. It was early evening, that soft hour when the sky starts to dim but the street lights haven't come on yet. I was already tired. My feet ached in the familiar way they always did after standing too long at work. I had groceries in the back seat. Nothing special, just milk, bread, and whatever was cheapest in the produce aisle that week. I told myself I'd just drop off the bag and leave. When I pulled up in front of my daughter's house, I noticed the front door was open. Not wide open, just enough. Enough that I could see the light from the hallway spilling out onto the porch. Enough that my stomach tightened before I even turned the engine off. I sat there for a moment, keys still in my hand. I thought about all the times I'd knocked on that door and waited, how sometimes it took a while before anyone answered, how sometimes no one did at all, even though I could hear the television inside. This time, no knocking was required. I stepped out of the car, and the air smelled like cut grass and someone else's dinner. The neighborhood was quiet in that watchful way, curtains half drawn, people pretending not to look. I reached the porch when a voice cut across the street. "Hey!" It startled me. I turned and saw a man standing in his driveway, one hand braced on the roof of his car. He looked annoyed, not concerned, not curious, annoyed. "You looking for somebody?" he called out. "Yes, my daughter lives here." He squinted at the open door, then back at me. "Well, you might want to check on that. The door's been like that a while." There was something in his voice, not kindness, not cruelty either, judgment, like an observation he'd already made up about. I thanked him quietly and stepped inside. The house smelled like cleaning spray and something burnt. Shoes were scattered near the entryway. A purse lay open on the table, receipts spilling out. The television was on in the living room, volume low, like someone had left in a hurry. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I stood there holding my grocery bag, feeling out of place in a home I'd helped pay for more times than I could count. I noticed things the way I always did. The new couch, the upgraded light fixture, the stack of unopened mail on the counter. I set the groceries down carefully, as if making noise would be rude. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from my daughter. "Running late. Can you wait a bit?" No apology, no explanation, just an assumption. I sat down at the kitchen table and folded my hands in my lap. The chair wobbled slightly. I adjusted my weight until it steadied. I looked at the clock. 6:42 p.m. I thought about my own kitchen, the one with the chipped countertop, the one where the fridge hummed too loudly at night, the one I always went back to. I went back to the kitchen. I always went back to the kitchen. Across the street the man was still watching. I didn't know then that this ordinary evening, this open door, this small moment of embarrassment was the beginning of something I couldn't unsee.
Please subscribe if you like this video, and please leave a comment and a like.
I didn't always feel invisible. It happened slowly, the way dust settles on shelves you stop checking. No single moment announced it, no argument, no slammed door, just repetition. I used to come by during the day, back when my schedule was more flexible and my daughter said it helped her out.
I'd let myself in with the spare key she gave me years ago. I'd call out her name even when I knew she wasn't home yet. Old habits linger. I cleaned while I waited, wiped the counters, loaded the dishwasher, folded laundry that wasn't mine. I told myself it was easier that way, that I liked being useful. I always liked being useful. When the baby was younger, I sat on the floor for hours, blocks digging into my knees, cartoons murmuring in the background. I learned the rhythm of nap times, the exact way he liked his sandwich cut. I stayed quiet when my back started to ache, because interrupting felt selfish. My daughter would come home and say, "Oh, good, you're here." Not thank you, just relief. Sometimes she'd talk while scrolling through her phone. Sometimes she wouldn't talk at all. I filled the silence by asking practical questions. Did he eat? Did you need anything else done? What time will you be back? When I left, I took the trash with me. It felt wrong not to. Phone calls followed the same pattern. She called when something needed to be solved, a pickup, a payment, a gap in her schedule. She didn't call to ask how my shift went. She didn't ask if my knee was still bothering me. She didn't notice when I stopped mentioning work altogether. I learned to keep conversations short, useful, efficient. One afternoon, while I was making dinner for myself, something simple, something cheap, she called to ask if I could cover a bill she'd forgotten about, just for a few days. "I'll send it back," she said. I didn't ask which bill. I didn't ask why. I transferred the money while stirring the pot with my other hand. The sauce bubbled over, leaving a sticky mess on the stove. I cleaned it up after we hung up. I went back to the kitchen. I always went back to the kitchen. At holidays, I brought food because it felt safer than showing up empty-handed. I arrived early because no one told me not to. I stayed busy because sitting still made me feel exposed. They talked over me. They talked around me. When I spoke, someone would nod without really listening. I started choosing the folding chair before anyone else could offer it. It wasn't that they were unkind. It was worse than that. They didn't think about me at all. By the time I sat in my daughter's kitchen that evening, waiting with the door still open and the neighbor watching, I already knew my role. I was the background, reliable, quiet, replaceable. And that realization sat with me longer than the groceries ever did.
She came home around 7. No rush, no apology. She stepped inside, talking into her phone, one hand covering the receiver when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table. "Oh, hey," she mouthed, pointing to the phone like I was interrupting something. I nodded and waited. I always waited. She paced while she talked, opening cabinets, checking the fridge, moving things I'd already straightened. When she finally hung up, she let out a long breath and leaned against the counter. "Rough day," she said. I didn't ask why. She noticed the grocery bag then, peeked inside. "You didn't have to do that," she said, already pulling the milk out. "But thanks." She poured herself a glass without asking if I wanted anything. We stood there in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between us. Outside, a car passed slowly. I thought of the man across the street and the way he'd looked at me like I didn't quite belong. My daughter cleared her throat. "So," she said, casual, "I need to ask you something." There it was. Not can I ask, just I need. She explained it the way people do when they've already decided the outcome, a timing issue, a mix-up, a shortfall that needed smoothing over. She said a number out loud, 3,000, and waited for my reaction. I looked down at my hands. The skin was dry around my knuckles. I made a note to buy lotion the next time I remembered. "That's most of what I have," I said. She frowned, not in concern, but in calculation. "Well, you don't really have many expenses," she said, "and it's just temporary." Temporary had become a flexible word. I thought about my rent, my prescriptions, the way my car hesitated in the mornings. I thought about how often temporary became permanent once the money left my account. She watched my face, waiting for the familiar softening, the quick nod, the relief. I felt it then, not anger, a quiet understanding. This wasn't a request, it was a pattern. She wasn't asking because she trusted me. She was asking because she assumed I would say yes, because I always had. "I'll think about it," I said. The room shifted. She blinked, laughed a little, like she thought I was joking. "Okay," she said slowly. "Just don't take too long." I picked up my coat a few minutes later. She walked me to the door, distracted again, already moving on. Outside, the porch light flickered on. Across the street, the man was gone. I sat in my car and didn't start the engine right away. For the first time, the sacrifice didn't feel noble. It felt expected. And that was when something inside me finally stopped cooperating. I didn't give her the money. I didn't tell her no right away either. I drove home in the dark with the radio off, listening to the small sounds my car made, every rattle, every hesitation. I knew those sounds well. I'd learned to listen for problems early. It was how I survived. At home, I turned on one lamp and sat at my kitchen table. My kitchen. The one with the chipped edge and the drawer that stuck if you pulled it too hard. The one that had held my life quietly for years. I opened my banking app. I didn't look for her balance. I looked at mine. I saw the numbers the way they really were this time, not as something flexible, not as something meant to be shared, just facts. I thought about the neighbor across the street, the open door, the way he'd yelled without knowing anything about me, the way embarrassment had burned hotter than fear. I thought about how often I'd felt that way lately, exposed without being protected. That night I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The next morning I made coffee and opened an envelope that had been sitting untouched in a stack of mail. I'd ignored it because it didn't look urgent, because nothing ever came addressed to me that way. Inside was a notice from an old account I'd forgotten about, something set up years ago, back when I still believed in planning for myself, back when I thought I might one day need something more than survival. It wasn't sudden wealth, it wasn't dramatic, but combined with what I already had and what I stopped giving away, it was enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to choose. I didn't tell my daughter, not that day, not the next. When she followed up about the money, I told her I couldn't help this time. I said it plainly, no explanation, no apology. There was a pause, then a clipped okay. She didn't ask why. That told me everything. Weeks passed, then months. I fixed things in my life quietly.
I paid down what I owed. I replaced what was worn instead of patching it again. I stopped arriving early. I stopped staying late. At the next holiday dinner, I brought one dish. I sat where there was space, not where I was assigned. When the evening wound down, I stood up and said goodbye before anyone asked me to do one last thing. My daughter looked surprised. So did I. Later, alone in my kitchen, I washed my own mug and set it on the counter. The room was quiet, not lonely, just quiet. I realized then that I hadn't been poor because I lacked money. I'd been poor because I kept giving away my place in my own life. And once I stopped doing that, everything else finally had room to grow.